Hello and welcome. I'm Nick Watt in Los Angeles. Ahead on CNN Newsroom, a sweeping foreign aid bill heads to President Joe Biden's desk after the U.S. Senate finally passed the measure, providing billions in vital military assistance for Ukraine, Israel, and Taiwan. A new deadline has been set for pro-Palestinian protesters to leave an encampment at New York's Columbia University. The school's president is threatening alternative options to have them removed. And the self-described eyes and ears of Donald Trump's first U.S. presidential campaign took jurors deeper into the hush money criminal case against him. Urgently needed supplies of ammunition, artillery rounds, air defense systems, and long-range missiles are expected to be airlifted to Ukraine within days, after the U.S. Congress finally approved a military aid package which had been stalled for months by Republican lawmakers. Ukraine will receive nearly $61 billion from the $95 billion foreign aid bill, which was approved by the Senate just a few hours ago. The rest will go to Israel and Taiwan. President Joe Biden says he will sign the bill into law in the coming hours. In a social media post, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky expressed his gratitude for the Senate's passage of the bill. Ukraine has been losing territory to Russia since December, when U.S. military assistance dried up. After the vote, Senate Majority Leader, Democrat Chuck Schumer, and Minority Leader, Republican Mitch McConnell, addressed the chamber.
We tell our allies, we stand with you. We tell our adversaries, don't mess with us. We tell the world, the United States will do everything to safeguard democracy and our way of life.
It's time to reaffirm some basic truths. Alliances matter. Foreign nations' respect for American interests depends on our willingness to defend them.
The passage of this funding bill through the Republican-controlled lower house to the Democrat-controlled Senate was a difficult and complicated process. CNN's Manu Raju is following the developments from Capitol Hill.
Now, a saga coming to an end that had divided the Republican Party for months. What to do about aid to Ukraine because of divisions within the ranks, because of the outspoken voices on the far right of the Republican conference, and because of the fact that the former president, Donald Trump, has been skeptical about more aid to Ukraine. This has changed how a lot of Republicans view whether or not the United States should have a more robust presence in the world, or whether they should pull back from its support of foreign wars. This debate between the so-called national security hawks and the isolationist wings of the Republican Party had played out for months and months and months, and had really stymied action on all of this. Now, one person who has been in the forefront on pushing this aid has been Senate Republican leader Mitch McConnell. He, of course, shepherded it through a $95 billion aid package along with Democratic leaders a couple months ago, 2 months ago. In fact, that plan included aid to Ukraine, Taiwan, and to Israel. Then it essentially went nowhere in the Republican-led House for more than 2 months until Speaker Mike Johnson decided to make a move and try to move on a similar plan with some modifications, with some changes, and send that back to the Senate on Saturday, ultimately leading to the Senate's final action on early this week. Now, McConnell, as he was discussing all of this, pinned the blame on the former Fox News host Tucker Carlson for stoking that anti-Ukraine sentiment within the GOP.
I think the demonization of Ukraine began by Tucker Carlson, who, in my opinion, ended up where he should have been all along, which is interviewing Vladimir Putin. And so he had an enormous audience, which convinced a lot of rank-and-file Republicans that maybe this was a mistake.
Now, This all comes as Mike Johnson making that decision to move ahead on aid to Ukraine and only angering folks on the right who have been concerned about some of his deal-making already, whether it's to keep the government open, whether it's to reauthorize a foreign intelligence surveillance law, as well as to actually move ahead on authorizing national security programs as he did under the National Defense Authorization Act late last year. All of these actions over the last 6 months since becoming Speaker have prompted this rebellion on the far right, including led right now by Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene, who has called for his ouster and threatened to call for such a vote. But there's a belief that Johnson being able to survive such a vote if it were to actually come to a head on the House floor, because potentially Democrats could come to his defense, and also the former president himself, Donald Trump, defending the actions of Mike Johnson in an interview earlier in the week. So a lot of questions about Johnson's future, but at the moment there is a belief and there's a relief among supporters of Ukraine aid on Capitol Hill that after months of battling, finally this chapter is done for now. Manu Raju, CNN, Capitol Hill.
Ukraine is also getting a fresh supply of cruise missiles as part of a $618 million aid package from the UK. The long-range Storm Shadow missiles are among more than 1,600 strike and air defense missiles, which will allow Ukraine to hit targets deep into Russian-held territory. Britain's aid package also includes 60 boats comprised of offshore raiding craft, rigid raiding craft, and dive boats. Also in that package, more than 400 vehicles, including armored mobility Huskies, which can be used as command, logistics, and resupply vehicles, and for removing casualties. Dozens of all-terrain vehicles are also being sent. With ceasefire talks between Israel and Hamas at an apparent standstill, fighting across Gaza is intensifying. The IDF is warning people to leave dangerous combat zones across northern Gaza. Residents there and in other parts of the enclave report nearly non-stop bombardments and some of the heaviest shelling in weeks. The Israeli military says it's using extreme force against terrorist infrastructure and subversive elements. And a Hamas spokesperson is calling for continued attacks on Israel in response. Rocket alerts sounded in 2 Israeli border towns on Tuesday, although no casualties were reported. Meanwhile, the US is urging Israel to get more humanitarian aid to Gaza.
The risk of famine throughout Gaza is very high, especially in the north. And the volume of assistance entering into and, most importantly, distributed within Gaza has increased significantly. But we know much more aid is needed.
Meantime, Israeli leaders are criticizing reports of U.S. plans to sanction an IDF unit criticized by others inside Israel and accused of human rights abuses against Palestinians in the West Bank long before the October 7th Hamas attacks. CNN's Nick Robertson has the details.
Palestinian-American Omar Assad was 78 years old when IDF soldiers from the ultra-religious Netzer Yehuda battalion detained him. Then witnesses say they left him to die. That was more than 2 years ago. His younger brother is still struggling with the family's loss.
He was a father to me, not just a brother. He was our happiness. He was our happiness.
The troops were internally investigated, criticized by IDF commanders for a moral failure. 2 officers were reprimanded but not prosecuted. They said they thought Omar Assad was alive when they left.
They're pushing you. Yeah.
Abu Mohammed was also detained that bitter January night, high in the occupied West Bank mountaintop village of Jajilia.
Like this, they're pushing you down like this. Walking up the road like this. Pushing.
He shows me how he says the troops rough-handled him, pushed him into the yard where Omar Assad lay on the freezing ground. This photo, taken that night, published in an Israeli newspaper, Abu Mohammed says shows him next to Omar Assad's prone body. Neither were accused of or had committed a crime. The IDF says they were stopped for vehicle inspections. Abu Mohammed clearly remembers the moment he discovered Omar Assad was dead. A soldier put his hand on his neck to check for a pulse, Abu Mohammed says, then left in a hurry. When I was sure they were gone, I checked him. He had no pulse, and I sent for the doctor.
Someone knocked the door and shouting, "Doctor, doctor, we need the help."
It was 3 a.m., Dr. Tahir says. He rushed to help, tried CPR, but says Omar Assad, overweight with a heart condition, was already dead.
No vital signs was on the patient.
He says he has seen the autopsy, determining Omar Assad died from a stress-induced heart attack, and shows me his own report of his actions that night. His conclusion is shocking. The soldiers could have saved Omar Assad.
It says he lost consciousness, for which the Israeli army escaped from the site and left him without giving him any
medical help. Yeah.
If they'd given him help, could he have lived?
Yeah, mostly yeah.
The killing of Omar Assad is just one case that Netzach Yehuda was involved in.
Yehuda Shul is an army veteran, has tracked the unit for years, says their reputation for violence precedes them. This video that caught them beating 2 Palestinians in the occupied West Bank 2 years ago quickly went viral. The IDF discharged the soldiers involved. Netzer Yehuda Battalion was originally designed to allow the ultra-Orthodox to join the army. But Shaul says it's become home for ultra-nationalists who underpin Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's right-wing government.
They kind of took over the unit, and it became very aggressive.
After U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken said determinations were being made about cutting all U.S. weapons and funding from the Netzer Yehuda Battalion over alleged human rights violations leaked several days ago, Netanyahu and his ministers have been hitting back at America. For Shaul and many others here who worry about the IDF's apparent impunity, the sanctions should be a pivotal moment of reckoning.
What we need to do is to start to behave, and start to behave morally, and start to have serious mechanisms of accountability in the IDF.
For Omar Assad's family, sanctions won't bring him back or mend his wife, who was broken by his brutal death.
To spend their time in jail.
You want to see the person who did this, the people responsible, go to jail.
Go to jail.
Omar Assad's grave, like so many others, witness to the lessons the IDF might learn and the cost of failure. Nick Robertson, CNN, Gilles Jalilia, the West Bank.
Officials at Columbia University in New York are urging students behind the pro-Palestinian protests on campus to dismantle their encampment. The school had set a midnight deadline to get the issue resolved. Then, earlier this hour, the editor-in-chief of the school newspaper told us that the deadline was extended to 8 a.m. local time. No comment so far from the school on that. Now, video from our affiliate WCBS appears to show just a handful of tents were taken down just before midnight. The rest remain. CNN's Jen Sullivan looks back at the developments on Tuesday.
Palestine will be free. Protests erupting on New York's Columbia University for a 7th day in a row. Students, stand your ground. Pro-Palestinian protesters taking over this quad and setting up tents, a violation of university policy. Israel. Students demanding a ceasefire in Gaza. The turmoil on campus causing many Jewish students to feel unsafe.
This is not a welcoming environment.
It's reached a boiling point in terms of anti-Semitism.
Classes now being offered online for the rest of the semester. The university saying Tuesday that the safety of our community is our #1 priority. The protests at Columbia inspiring similar demonstrations at other campuses. At New York University, students and faculty clashing with police. The NYPD arresting more than 130 people.
There is no place for hate in this city.
Similar protests staged at Yale University, where dozens of students were also arrested. Pro-Palestinian students at MIT condemning Israel's actions in Gaza.
There's a genocide going on.
The protests sweeping across the country. On Berkeley's campus in California, students setting up this solidarity encampment.
It's time that the university implement real protective measures for their Muslim, Palestinian, Arab, and pro-Palestinian students.
The White House says President Joe Biden is monitoring the protests, but won't say if he believes New York officials should deploy the National Guard to restore order. In New York, I'm Jen Sullivan reporting.
Joining me now is Sarah Huddleston, University News Editor with the Columbia Daily Spectator. Sarah, so I just want to start with some of the scenes we've been seeing on the campus there. I mean, scenes that we haven't seen in my lifetime, and I'm not a young man. The introduction of the police. Now, I've spoken to people on university campuses out here, administrators, who've been very keen not to get the police involved because they feel that that just inflames and, in fact, makes it all grow. What's your take on the impact of the police in what's happened at Columbia?
Sure. Our university president, Minu Shafiq's decision to authorize NYPD personnel onto our campus was the first time that the university president has authorized such presence in over 50 years. So it's definitely something that is precedented at Columbia, but is certainly not regular. As you may have mentioned, it leads to an increase in tensions, distrust towards the administration, etc. Speaking to students immediately following those arrests, it certainly did shock the community. Speaking with faculty as well, faculty really did rally in support of students who were both arrested but then also suspended by the university for their involvement in the Gaza Solidarity Encampment, as organizers title it.
Now, the administrator's justification for the action they're taking is that, you know, they say that the campus is not a safe place for some people, for Jewish students. I mean, what's your take on that? I mean, this certainly looks, and, you know, I've been at some of these protests, not at Columbia, but where there is certainly an atmosphere in which Jewish students do not feel safe. What do you say to that?
Based off of our reporting recently, the difference really comes with ongoing on-campus protests, which are organized by students or affiliate groups, such as faculty or staff, and ongoing off-campus protests that, while they are happening right outside of our Columbia gates, are mainly organized by autonomous, unaffiliated, perhaps individuals or organizations. And that's really has been a site of quite of anti-Semitic rhetoric or incidents that make it so that some Jewish students report feeling unsafe when walking through those protests through onto campus.
So just to be clear, you're saying that that kind of atmosphere is being created by kind of off-campus groups outside rather than the student protesters actually on campus?
Currently, that seems to be more so the sentiment that we're hearing, just because ongoing off-campus protests have continued for the past couple of days. In regards to on-campus reports of anti-Semitism or anti-Semitic harassment or language, there certainly have been reports of such things happening on our campus. However, in recent days, most of those reports are happening from outside of campus.
Got you. Now, I mean, what do we think is going to happen? I mean, I've just got a letter that the president put out today. She's saying that there have been, talks between administrators and student groups, and that there's a deadline midnight tonight to reach an agreement. I'm going to quote, "I very much hope these discussions are successful. If they are not, we will have to consider alternative options for clearing the West Lawn." Do you know how successful those talks have or haven't been?
It's a great question. We actually did just run an article breaking this news. And it is something that is top of our minds as we move forward into the future and the uncertainty of this current moment. In regards to the negotiations themselves, we have been aware that they have been ongoing. They are mainly between student organizers and members of our administration and members of our university senate, which is a shared governing body on campus. As for the content of those negotiations, they're less known to us at this time. However, student organizers have been adamant that they will remain on campus or on those lawns until their demands are met. And the primary demand for these student organizers is university divestment from companies with ties to Israel.
Wow, so it's going to be an interesting week at Columbia. Sarah Huddleston, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me.
The so-called eyes and ears of the first Trump campaign takes the stand in the historic hush money trial. What a former tabloid king told the court about the catch and kill agreement with then candidate Trump.